Most people live like they have time, right? Time to change, time to improve, time to fix their habits. But Islam teaches something very different. There's a mindset that a lot of people fall into, often without even noticing it. The idea that I'll fix things later, that change can wait, that seriousness can wait, that turning back to Allah can be delayed. And this is especially common when a person is young. There's this quiet assumption that there's plenty of time. Time to sort things out, time to become more disciplined, time to take the religion more seriously. Just, not right now. So the days pass and nothing feels urgent. Part of the reason for this is simple. Most people don't think about death or accountability on a daily basis, not in a real, present way. It remains something distant, right? Something abstract, something that'll come eventually, but not yet. And when something feels distant, it's easy to keep postponing change. And that leads to a deeper question. Do we actually have the time we think we do? Because once that question becomes real, right, the entire way a person looks at delay, habit, and change begins to shift. Now, Islam constantly reminds us that life is temporary and length is never guaranteed. So why do people keep delaying change? Part of it is how we think about time in general, right? We tend to connect life stages with certainty. We assume there will be a later, right? Later to fix things, later to improve, later to return. But the reality is, death is not tied to age. It doesn't follow a schedule we can see. It can come early, it can come suddenly, it can come without warning, it can come right now. Yet, at the same time, people make very detailed long-term plans. Plans for their careers, for their finances, their family, years ahead. There's nothing wrong with planning, but often that same sense of urgency is missing when it comes to the soul. Spiritual matters get pushed back. Not rejected, just delayed. And one of the most common examples of this is delaying tawbah, repentance, right? A person knows they should turn back to Allah. They know certain things do need to change, but they just tell themselves, I'll deal with it later. And later keeps moving. What begins as a small delay does not stay small. Small delays slowly turn into long-term neglect. Days become weeks, weeks become months, etc. And eventually it becomes a pattern. Not because the person intended to abandon change altogether, but because they kept postponing it. Sometimes it's simply delay repeated over time. And that's how something important slowly fades into the background. But here's what many people overlook. Delaying change doesn't feel dangerous at the time, right? Until time runs out. In Islamic teaching, there's a clear emphasis on not delaying repentance. Turning back to Allah is not something that is meant to be postponed indefinitely. It's meant to be done as soon as a person realizes, right, when they become aware that something needs to change. The Quran repeatedly reminds us that this life is temporary, not in a distant, abstract way, but as a reality that shapes how we act now. Life is passing, whether we pay attention or not. And because of that, scholars often warned against relying on the idea of later. Not because planning is wrong, but because guaranteeing yourself a future opportunity to change is something no one actually has. A person might intend it to return, they might fully believe they will fix things, but intention alone doesn't secure the time to do it. And this connects to another important point. Accountability is tied to what we actually do in this life, not what we planned on doing later, not what we hope to do one day, but what we acted on. So the emphasis in the tradition is not harshness, it's clarity. If a person recognizes a need to change, the right moment to begin is not some distant future, it's now, while the opportunity is still in front of them. And this points to something deeper still in how we think. There's a kind of illusion of control over time. We plan, we schedule, we map things out, and without realizing it, we begin to feel as though time is something we can rely on, as though the future is something already waiting for us. But in reality, time isn't something we control in that way. It's something we're given, moment by moment. And then there's the role of comfort. When life feels stable, when things are manageable, there's no strong push to change. There's no urgency. So the mind, naturally says, not now, later. Not because a person rejects what's right, but because they feel no pressure to act on it immediately. And this is where another subtle factor comes in. The shaitan does not always push a person to reject good completely. Sometimes it's enough to make them postpone it. It's not that he's saying don't change, but you can change later. Not leave it completely, but there's still time. And that idea can stay with a person for years. So people begin to assume they'll eventually become better, eventually more consistent, eventually more serious, eventually closer to Allah, but eventually can quietly turn into never if nothing actually changes in the present. And that's the subtle danger. Not open rejection, but endless delay. So what can you actually do about this? Start with small changes right now. You don't need a perfect moment, right? You don't need everything to be ideal. You just need to begin, right? Next is don't wait to correct mistakes. The longer a slip goes unaddressed, the easier it is to become a habit. So shorten the gap between mistake and correction. Turn back quickly, even in small steps. And work on building a sense of urgency in your daily mindset. Remind yourself that time is limited and that each moment is an opportunity. Now, you shouldn't let this turn into fear or panic. It only means that you should stay aware, right? Stay present. Keep your attention on what truly matters. Because when small, consistent steps are taken today, they also add up. And that's how change becomes real, moment by moment, decision by decision. Now, the key thing to remember is this: you don't control how much time you have. You only control what you do with it. And when you stop relying on later, that's when real change begins. If this made you reflect, consider subscribing. On this channel, I break down important reminders so you can approach your faith with clarity and awareness.